Good morning, this is Beam, and today I'm going to be talking about Sony Vegas 13 versus Adobe Premiere Pro 6.0. In my opinion, what makes one better than the other is just going to be pure functionality and usability. I started with Sony Vegas, and one thing you're going to notice most when going from Sony Vegas to Adobe Premiere is that this timeline is a lot shorter. The timeline is the life and blood of all video editing. Everything that you're going to be doing when you're doing video editing is going to be right here. So being able to see more of it is going to help you out. Now you can take this and you can move this window somewhere else. You can put it like up here, and then you can move this over here if you want to, and that'll extend it out. But the default layout really is the best way to edit using this program, just because there are going to be things over here that you need, like the effects especially, where if you click on something and you want to put in an effect, this has to be right over here, and so you do end up with a shorter timeline. To be fair, eventually if you use it long enough you do get used to it, and plus Adobe has this that's shift tilde, and you can see the timeline full screen, and that works on any window, whichever one is active. You can make any window full screen. So that's very handy. On Sony Vegas, if you use the middle mouse button, you can zoom in and out like that. And then if you move the cursor somewhere, you can zoom in and out there. And I actually did use this just for moving around the timeline for a long time using Sony Vegas. It's fast, efficient, and it's the way it should be. On Premiere, to zoom in and out, it is Alt and then the mouse wheel. Now that works, and that's fine. It's one extra key, and I don't like using extra keys if I don't have to. But there's one extra problem with it, and that is that when you're done, if you decide from there you want to hit play, this is what happens. You see at the top left, this is a Windows default. Anytime you hit Alt and then spacebar, that's what happens. You have to remember every time you zoom out, you also have to click on something, and then you can hit spacebar to play. And that's kind of a bummer. So I told myself, okay, the default is terrible. Let's go ahead and change the key binding. So go to Edit, Keyboard Shortcuts, and then Zoom. And they've got the default to zoom out is minus and zoom in is equal, so that's the plus on the keyboard also. So I want to change zoom in to move the middle mouse wheel forward. And I'm moving the middle mouse wheel forward now, and it's not doing anything. Maybe it's not working. Hit edit. Nope, still doesn't work. The problem with changing the key binding is for some reason it does not recognize the middle mouse button. It does not recognize the middle mouse wheel. I can even click on it using the middle mouse button, and it does not work. Now when I say click, the reason that that's important is because if I go to Sony Vegas and I click on something with the middle mouse wheel, I get this, so I can just swipe it back and forth. That makes it really nice. That's something I actually learned while I was making the Linux video and I was trying out Blender. And if you want to, you can watch my impressions on Blender in this video here, and also you can watch Mikeycal's videos. I watched those and I learned a lot about Blender watching those, but through that I also learned about the middle mouse button. That lets you move left and right. That works in Blender, that works in Sony Vegas, but for some reason that does not work in Adobe Premiere. Middle mouse button does not do a single thing. And same thing for that. If you go to Edit, Keyboard Presets, Hand Tool, let's edit that, and middle mouse button. Nope, doesn't work. For some reason, Adobe Premiere does not recognize the middle mouse button as a key bindable option. And while we're here, you can see this. This is Save Project. It does this every 10 minutes. Now you can tell it when you want it to do it, but while it's doing it, you can't do anything. So if you're in the middle of something and you're really pushing to get this done, and that happens, you just have to wait. Whereas with Sony Vegas, that doesn't happen. It does save, but it doesn't get in your way like that. That's one thing that really bothers me about Adobe Premiere. It just breaks up the immersion in what you're doing. Now back to where I was. The strangest thing about not being able to use the middle mouse button here is that if you go to Adobe After Effects, you can click and you can drag around. So that means that the people who are making Adobe After Effects and the people who are making Adobe Premiere, we're not communicating with each other. And that's a real bummer, because once you start using this, it makes your life a lot easier. So you can use it here, you just have to hit H, and then you can drag around. So you have to use a keyboard a lot more in Adobe Premiere than you do have to in Sony Vegas, which is a bummer for me because I like to be able to continue working while I'm, say, taking a drink. With Sony Vegas, almost everything that you can do on here, you can do just with the mouse. With Adobe Premiere, you have to have two hands on the system at all times. So let's talk about something that Sony Vegas does very well. One of the most common things that I do, especially with text, whenever I put text on the screen, is I fade it in and out because I don't like it to just pink be there and then pink disappear. I want it to just gradually come in and then gradually go out. So you can see here I've got some text, and if I hit play, well, it's not going to show it because it's not rendering very fast, which is actually the reason that I wanted to try Adobe Premiere in the first place. I always felt that Sony Vegas rendered kind of slow, like I lose a lot of frames. Let's try it again. Okay, didn't really work. There we go. Now you can see that fade. So it starts out full opacity and then it gradually goes down. You can change that fade by moving this right here. You can make it disappear entirely, so it's going to be there and then just disappear. See, it just pops out. Or you can put that fade in just by grabbing this corner and pulling it in. There, and you can see it fading out. Now that fade is so easy to do in Sony Vegas. You can do that on text. You can do that with audio. So you can take this and put a fade in here. You have to understand some of the terminology that we use. The operator side is the near side of the press. And so making a fade is extremely easy. With Adobe Premiere, it's not really complicated, but it's just extra steps. It's more difficult than it has to be. To do that, I've got some text right here, and you go to opacity, make a keyframe, start out at 0, move it forward, and then make it 100%. 100%. So then when you hit play, it fades in. And to do a fade out, you do the same thing. Go to the end, hit 0, and then go more towards the middle and make it 100. And then it'll fade out. Now that works, but if you have to do that over and over, you have 3 of them, then you would have to go here, make it 0, go here, make it 100, then go to the end, make it 0, go here, make it 100, then go to the next one, go to the beginning, 0, keyframe, here, 100. And you can see that this is going to start taking a while, whereas with Sony Vegas, you can make it once, and then every single one will have the exact same fade on every single video. And if you make another one, you can just line it up, and then, say, drag it there. Then you can drag the next one to it, and you just line them all up like that. So you could line them up and make that fade very quickly with a bunch of different tracks. So if you have one specific fade style or length that you like, you can just keep that with every single track. Which is actually a weird thing, because you can see here, if I try and make another copy of this text, it will say, would you like to make a new one, or would you like to make the same one? You can make another one with entirely different text. And it won't bother it. Whereas with Adobe Premiere, if you copy this and then paste it next to it, and then you want to change this, it's also going to change the original. So you have to create a new title every single time you want to make a new one. And that's more work than needs to be. So Sony Vegas figured out how to copy and paste text. That's really all there is to that. And that brings me to my next gripe. This one's about Sony Vegas. Let's say, for example, that you're on Windows and you want to click on something. And, well, let's just click on a bunch of them because we need these ones. If you go to Adobe Premiere and you want to select all of them, you can just drag that selection box around them, just like that, as you would think you should be able to. With Sony Vegas, that's what it does. It creates a new work area. Now this is one of those no-duh things. This is something that Sony Vegas failed on so miserably that I can't even believe it. I've been working with this for a while, and this is the biggest gripe that I have. I mean, as far as usability goes, this should have been implemented. So you can click on something and then shift click and then select them all, but you should be able to just drag a selection box. It should be that easy. It really should. So Sony Vegas completely failed on that. So let's say that you want to select this one and this one. You select it, then hold Control, select the next one. Right? No duh. And then if you want to select a bunch of them in a row, you just hold Shift, and that selects everything from here to there. Right? Just like with a Windows program. Here to here, Shift. Or here to here, Control. Very simple stuff. So you would think with Adobe Premiere you could do the same thing. Here, here, Control. Nope. It just selects another one. Alright, how about Shift? Here to here. No, that's the same as Control. So, they both failed on selection. I don't know why. This doesn't make sense. If you have a bunch in here, you should be able to click here, then hold Shift, click here, and then boom, you got them. But you don't have this one, so you have to click every single one. So that brings me to my next gripe with Sony Vegas. Let's say that you've made this video and you want to put this right before it. So what you would have to do is click over here somewhere, and then shift click over here, and then move it, then move this video over, and then click here and shift click and move it back. And you can see that I left one over. That's because you have to click very precisely to get exactly what you want. So in Adobe Premiere, that's a cut. And you go where you want to put it. You hit A, then Shift. And you can see that I've got every single thing. And you can move it, paste the item, ripple delete, ripple delete. So putting something in is a lot easier on Adobe Premiere. However, that brings me to selecting small things. Let's say I want to extend the size of this clip right here. Now from here, from this viewpoint, you can't get it. The only way to do that is to zoom in, then you can grab it, hopefully. Nope, you can't even get it here. Why is it doing that? Okay, there we go. So now you can grab it and you can extend the size. But the more you zoom out, the less you can actually manipulate the timeline. Whereas with Sony Vegas, you can grab pretty minuscule pieces and move them around. The ability to click on things and move them around in Sony Vegas is just way better. And in Adobe Premiere, what makes this even more complicated is what they have for the opacity line. So let's say I wanted to grab this. Most of the time you just grab it and you move it like that. But I would say that 3 times out of 10 when I grab it, I'm actually grabbing this. So I want to move the video, but it's not moving because what I grabbed was that little yellow opacity line. So that thing just gets in the way and it's there by default and you can't really get rid of it. In Sony Vegas, you can get that in the audio, but you have to put it in there manually. So typically you're going to do all your audio cutting and then do the volume normalization afterwards. So that way it's not getting in your way until the very final step. Speaking of steps, this is how I usually do my editing. I will take all my videos, the raw video files, and I will put them over here. And then as I need them, I'll drag it over here. And then I'll cut it down and do whatever editing I have to it. Now as you can see here, the final product that I have is about 40 minutes long. And if you extend that out, you can see on the right that I'm at 4 hours, 16 hours, 22 hours, 1 day, a day and 12 hours, 2 days, and counting. The length of Sony Vegas timeline is as long as you want it to be. In Adobe Premiere, on the other hand, they have a hard limit of 24 hours. Now 24 hours is longer than you're ever going to make any kind of a video, but you can see here just above 20 hours in my raw video for making a 1 hour video. So I'm getting pretty close. What that would mean is if I had more raw videos, I would have to make another sequence. So I have to go to here, File, New, Sequence, OK. So then I could take my videos that I have here and then whatever new videos I have I could put in here. Now this is kind of a bummer for me because I like having that extra space. There was probably a good reason for it, but whatever that good reason is not good enough. And this is one of those things where we'll say I was in direct competition with taking the Hobbits to Isengard for 10 hours. And I said, okay, well I'm going to make one for 11 hours. And he says, okay, I'm going to make one for 14 hours. And then I say, okay, I'm going to make one for 20 hours. And he makes one for 24 hours. With Adobe Premiere, you just can't go higher than 24 hours. It's not possible. So that's kind of a bummer. This is another thing that I ran into with Blender. There is a hard limit to the length of video that you can make. The only possible reason to have more than 24 hours into an active timeline that I've been able to find is that there was one guy that wanted to put in 25 hours into a giant clip and then speed it up into a hyperlapse effect. So that is one thing, and the fact is he wouldn't be able to do that with Adobe Premiere. What he would end up having to do is put that all in that hyperlapse, then render the video, and then make 2 videos and render them together. That's the only way he'd be able to do it. But if for any reason you want to make more than 24 hours, maybe you want to do some artistic The Egg for 48 hours experiment, you can't do that with Adobe Premiere. You would have to use Sony Vegas. Now with that, I did find an actually very useful thing with Adobe Premiere, which is you can make a bunch of sequences, and you can see how in Sony Vegas I would have everything kind of split up. So this would be one group of movies. They are organized to be together that way. If I was looking for one specific one, I would know that it's going to be within this batch, and then I just have to look through it. Adobe Premiere, you can also take these and then put them into a sequence by themselves, then edit the sequence the way that you want it, and then take all of the sequences and put them into one giant clip like this. And this is much easier to work with, and that way if you find a mistake, let's say on Sony Vegas that I had a mistake here, right? So I needed to be able to fix that. So I would have to do that whole mess of shift clicking the entire mess and probably mess with a lot of groups and that kind of thing. And then after fixing it, I might even have a timeline problem where something else went out of sync. With Adobe Premiere, you can fix it in a much more manageable area. Just shrink these down a little bit and it's a lot easier to handle. Otherwise, you'd be looking at something more like this. So these sequences do help out with editing quite a bit. There is something about Sony Vegas that does kind of bother me, and that's every time I click a video, that also moves the playhead. So if I just wanted to click a video and move it like this, I would have to do it just like that. But if I want to make sure that I click the right one, let's say I was getting this one, it's going to move the playhead too. And then when it moves the playhead, it also puts this double arrow in here, so I just can't click on the one that I want. So that's kind of a problem. With Adobe Premiere, if you want to move the playhead, you have to click up here. If you click on a video, it's just going to click the video. So that's kind of nice. However, there's one thing about Adobe Premiere that is kind of a bummer. That is when you hit play, you can grab the folder with your hands and it's going to stop right wherever you stopped. Now with Sony Vegas, you can do that too just by hitting the enter key. From the unit screen, there's a button, or if you just hit the space bar, it will play, and then whenever it's done, it will go right back to where you were. Button code status, this is one that button code status. This is now the importance of that is if you're looking for a very specific point in a video, you can play it over and over and make sure that you get the exact right spot. And then wherever the playhead is, that's where you're going to make it cut. And that's perfectly fine. That's good. Let's say I want to get right where it says fine. And that's perfectly fine. And that's perfectly fine. Fine. That's fine. That's okay. So you know that it's right before the fine. Then you can hit S and split it right there. With Adobe Premiere, around the cam door before you. Okay, I want to get it right where it says around the cam door. Around the cam door. Around the cam door before. So you're gonna have to kind of guess. Cam door before. Okay, so it's right here, I think. Now I just clicked, so I could have moved it a little bit. I can't be 100% sure that this is the exact spot. All I can do is cut and then hit play. Cam door before you. And I guess I was right. But it could move it by milliseconds, and if that matters, like for your video, if you're trying to line up audio with video, then that will make a big difference. Speaking of lining up audio with video, let's take a look at a video that I've got with Jeremy Seo.
Boom! Right there!
He has a gesture, and there's a song right here, and I want to line up that gesture with this song. Now if I take this and I move it, you can see that these waveforms move while I'm dragging it. So if I take the song, I can tell that I want the gesture to line up right about here. So I can take this and I can just drop it right there. I know it's already lined up. I don't even have to play it, and I can already tell that it's going to be great.
A solid trophy. You had a question? Boom! Right there!
In Adobe Premiere, I've got the same song and the same waveform. I want to drag this and line it up, but as you can see, when I move it, you cannot see the waveform move. So the only way you can do it is drop it, see where it is. It was actually pretty close, so let's try and move it a little bit more. But you can see here where it's starting to play with me, because if I drop it just like one bit to the side, it's too far. Try and move it back. As soon as it starts moving, it's already too far, which means you have to zoom in. And you can't really tell where it's at. You can just kind of hope and guess, and then just keep on playing until it finally lines up. This is something Sony Vegas did a lot better. Now there's one other thing that happens. If you drag something over here, and then you move it back, it deleted this section of the audio. So you have to stretch that back out. Now if you go all the way over and you accidentally cover up the whole thing and you don't realize it and you just keep on editing away, you might lose that chunk of audio. So you'd be like, oh wait, this doesn't line up with it. You go back and then you just have blank audio here. This is something that I really don't like. I would prefer it work more like Sony Vegas. So let's say Sony Vegas, you've got this. You drag it over top of your video here. You still have both videos. It just one is overlaid the other one, and they have a fade. So you can see here, and this one's slowly fading out, and this one's slowly fading in. This video is here, and this video is also still here. And you can drag it out, and if you made a mistake, you're not going to have lost anything. I much prefer this. And that brings me to my next part, which is grouping. Alright, let's do it on Sony Vegas. Sony Vegas, they both move together. If you want to ungroup them, hit U. Then you click on the one you want, and now they move independently. It's that simple. And if you want to group them back up, click them both and hit G. That way, if you have multiple videos and things that are lining up like this, you can click on them all hit G, then click on any one of them, and they will all move. Adobe Premiere, Control G, groups things together. So Control G, now I've got a group, and this will move together. Click off of it, click on it, and we got a group. Alright, Control Shift G, and now the group is disbanded. Grouping with this is actually kind of a nightmare. And one of the worst things about it is, let's say that you have an effect on here, or you want to change an effect. Let's say you want to put in a lens distortion. It's going to apply to the entire thing. But you can't put it on there because once you've made a group, all of your effects controls are gone. So the only way that you can make an effect change is you would have to do Control Shift G to ungroup it. And now you have control over the effects again. The lens distortion is there. I'll just delete that. But as soon as you make it a group, all the effects controls are gone. Alright, so let's do this another way. I'm going to take this and I'm going to hold Alt and drag just the audio. Alright, so now I've got just the audio by itself. Now I can move it and I've got just the portion of the audio I want. So I've got this. Now I can click back on my video, Control G, and group it. And as you can see, effects controls are gone. So I've got the same video with the same audio, and yet I have no control over the effects. This is ridiculous. This is unbelievable. So in order to change the effects on the video, I now have to do Control Shift G to ungroup it. Then I can change the opacity or do whatever I want to do. Then if I move it accidentally, it's going to desync from the audio. It's just a pain in the ass to work with. Working with groups in Adobe Premiere is a nightmare, and here we have to wait again. I was just doing something, but it's just going to save it anyway. That autosave feature really just annoys me. So since we're talking about effects, let's go back to Sony Vegas. To do an effect in Sony Vegas, it's a lot easier. You go here, click on this, and then all of your effects are listed. So I want to do the lens distortion. Sony Deform does the same thing. The difference is you have to manually change it. So this is one thing where Adobe Premiere actually handles it very well. Because I'm using a GoPro, it automatically distorts what you would normally see because it has a wide angle lens, so the things on the side are going to look a little bit weird. And if you're using a medium recording, you can put a lens distortion on it, then put a curvature of -18. And this is actually the downfall of Adobe Premiere, because effects in Adobe Premiere slow it way down. And that's actually the main reason that I went to Adobe Premiere in the first place, is because I always heard that it ran a lot better than Sony Vegas. Now, if I was to... yeah, I can't even skip... Okay, here we go. I'm going to try and play it and see what this looks like. But if there is a problem with it, make sure you clean all the area around the cam door before you... Okay, it's actually not doing too awful bad. But I have seen it in the past, especially if I'm using a wide angle on the GoPro door. But if there is a problem with it, make sure you clean all the area around the cam door. It's actually not doing too bad right now. So I just got lucky where you did. But with Sony Vegas, if you wanted to do it, you would have to do it all manually. So let's say I wanted to make this straight. I would have to put the amount up a little bit, and then we'll say, let's stretch the top. There we go. Now we're straightening it out. So you can see that you can do it, but you have to do it manually, and it's also not going to look perfect every single time you do it. And once you do that, you're also going to have to zoom in a bit to chop off this black. So Sony Vegas, kind of a bummer. Let's see what it looks like when we play it. Okay, now you can see how it's kind of choppy. It's not playing perfectly. And as long as you're not doing too many transformations to it, it still should play kind of okay. But when you start putting on layers and layers of transformations, or you can start playing back at a higher frame rate or resolution, it's going to be more and more choppy. Now, one way that you can fix that, you can turn the preview down, and that's going to make it kind of fuzzy. You can see all the pixels, very pixelated, doesn't look very good. But it will increase the FPS a little bit, whereas on Adobe Premiere, or before you remove it, because you do it right here, full. Now you can see it's pretty sharp if you try and play.
You don't want any dust or junk falling into the
Actually
camera.
not bad. But if you wanted to make it faster, you can bring it down. And if you
Problem
play,
with it, make sure you clean all the area.
you can see some of the pixels. And this is one thing that Adobe Premiere actually did very well, which is when you hit pause, it's going to try and render it out in full quality. Even if you have it set to a quarter, that way you can see things that are going on. So if you remember back in Sony Vegas, if you go back to the beginning, there's text here, but you can't see it. Now if you're using Adobe Premiere, as long as the video is paused, everything is sharp. It doesn't actually get blocky until you hit play. And kind of just like a little bit blocky. You can see most of it in the image. So that's something that Adobe Premiere did very well. And this is something I was trying to make, and I was using Sony Vegas and I was trying to think of how to do it, and it just was not coming out right. But I really wanted to be very detailed. I'm going to zoom in on this. You can see these little things are going to plunge in every time it hits. This spins around. These are going to pull out whenever it hits this area. This spins, this spins, this is spinning. There's a lot of different moving parts. When I was using Sony Vegas, the tool for that is you have to make a picture and you have to cut out little pieces, and to do that you can use GIMP. GIMP is the free man's Photoshop. So this works like Photoshop, except it's free and it's open source. It's great. If you don't have any money, you can use GIMP. But Photoshop works a little bit better. Now originally I was going to try and make this just with Adobe After Effects. And when I say Adobe After Effects, what I mean is Adobe Premiere by itself is not a great editor. It's a great sequencer, but it's not a great editor. And they'll say, well, it's not supposed to be an editor. It's a sequencer. Bullshit. If you get a video and you put it in it and you change it and you render it and it comes out as a different video, that's a video editor. Adobe After Effects is their editor. Now, what I wanted to do originally was I took the picture in here and then I started using rotoscoping. And rotoscoping is just going to kind of chop out the area and then play it. But it played so slow it was unusable. So rotoscoping, I thought that was going to save me. It really doesn't. It's terrible. So in order to make this, I had to use Premiere, Adobe After Effects, and Photoshop. I had to use all three. So I used Photoshop and I took this picture and I cut out all these images, made new layers, took those layers, put it in here, rendered it, and then animated it. And I took this and put it in Premiere, and I'm using that sequence in the video sequence. But with Adobe After Effects and Adobe Photoshop, Adobe Premiere becomes a lot more powerful. Okay, now both programs have a swiper, and what that is you grab the head and you move it around and you can hear what's going on. So let's listen to it in Sony Vegas.
Out of the
Sounds pretty terrible. Let's go to Adobe Premiere.
For the wheel, you're going to see a mark.
It's actually listenable. So the swiper in Adobe Premiere is 10 times better than the swiper in Sony Vegas. Now I want to talk about working with images. This is where Sony Vegas completely fails for me. Alright, so I've got this arrow, and you can see this box represents the window. So it's always pointing up as an image, but on here you can rotate it so you can move it around and kind of do lots of different things. That'll make it larger and smaller, but let's say we want it to just be in this corner. So we want it to be pointing at that corner. So we're going to take it and we're going to move it here, but as you can see here, this is where it thinks the corner is. So it's not right. So we can kind of do weird, dumb things, and when you're doing this, you can see how the arrow is a lot larger now than it was before. That's because you have to stretch and change the way that things are. Now it's cutting some of it off. Nope, no we can't. Yes we can. Alright. Okay, now we kind of got it. Good, so we got it. But you can see it's a lot larger now than it was before. And if I didn't want it to be big like that, too bad. That's just the way it is. I always thought when I was working with this, why can't I just grab the damn thing and move it where I want it to go? Well, I want to be able to shrink it and move it, and that's where Adobe Premiere is way better. Well, you got the arrow. If you want to move it, watch this. Boom. And you can move it anywhere you want it to go. It is so much less complicated. Doop. And it's done. Just like that. Working with images in Adobe Premiere Pro is 10 times easier than Sony Vegas. Alright, so let's say that I've got this arrow effect here and it's perfect. It's exactly the way I want it. And I'm making another video and I want to have this effect in it. What I can do, you just middle click. If you middle click on the taskbar on an icon, it's going to open up another instance of it. It always does that on every program. So I've got You copy it, you go over to the other one, hit paste. So now I've got the edit exactly as I had it in here. So that's great if you want to copy over things like if you have the intro made out and it took a long time making it, you can just copy and paste it from one to the other. And that's great. But in Premiere, if you click on it, that's what it does. Nothing. The reason it does that is because it is not possible to open up more than one instance of Adobe Premiere Pro. So let's say that you've got these and you want to put in another one. What you have to do is close it, then open it again, and you have to wait, and then you can paste it. So you can have more than one project open at once, and that's a real bummer because I've often copied stuff from one project to another project. This is one of those things where there was probably a good reason for it, but whatever that reason is not good enough. Now we're going to try and do the same effect with both editors. What I want to do is I want to make 3 videos across and 3 videos down and have all 9 videos playing all at the same time. So I'm going to start out with Premiere. And believe it or not, it's playing right now. Not very well, but it's playing. Okay, so let's say we get to here and you want to bring in another video. So we're going to put this right here. Okay. So now this one's covered, but now it's taking up the whole screen. So you have to copy and then paste attributes. Alright, and now it's filled that up. And you'll have to do that every single time. Sony Vegas, let's try and pull off the same thing. So now I've done the same thing. And if you hit play, it's also pretty blocky. It's not very great. Now this is one thing about doing this that makes life a lot easier. If you were to take another video and you put it here, it automatically puts it to the correct size because you set this entire video length. Now it's a good thing and it's a bad thing because you have to remember that everything that you put on this track is going to be that size. But you could do this all day and all night just dropping videos in and they're all going to be the perfect size. So let's do the last test, which is the render test. This is time. How long is it going to take to render this video on both Adobe Premiere and on Sony Vegas? That is 41.08 seconds. To File, Render As, and I've got a 4K 2-pass 12 megabit per second Q-to-core render. Let's just change that a little bit. Let's use just CPU just to make sure that we know what's going on, and we'll do a single pass. So this is a 1080p video, but we're going to render it in 4K. Okay, and let's render and see how long it takes. And it's done. And it appears we have a total render time of 8 minutes and 36 seconds. Looks pretty good. I don't see any lines here. I'm always looking for those lines. A little bit. No, that looks good. It's just the black meeting the white. So let's see what it looks like in Adobe Premiere. Alright, so I got 38 and I've got 29.97, so this is another 4K. So I'm going to turn off the 2-pass and I'm going to also put this at 12. And I'm going to turn this off. I want to try and make it as close as I can. I think that's about right. Now you can export it just like this, but I want to show you what happens. Okay. Now it's starting to encode. This is the important thing. You noticed on Sony Vegas that the preview was also changing while it was encoding. On Adobe Premiere, it's not going to do that. That's unfortunate because every once in a while the program will freeze in the middle of an encode, especially if you're using the video card. But if it freezes, you're not really going to know, especially if your encode is over an hour long. Like this one's going fairly fast, but if it just said 5% and it stayed there for an hour, you wouldn't know if that frame that it was encoding had a lot of information going into it. So if there was a lot of details, things moving around, warping, stuff like that. If there was a lot of that going on, then maybe, yeah, it will take a long time, but it could have just froze. Because the preview isn't moving, you're not going to know for sure. That's one way where Sony Vegas is a little bit better. However, I'm going to cancel this, and there is another option called Q. And that opens up Adobe Media Encoder. So it does the same thing, but there's a little preview in the bottom. So you can see that it's actually working. More importantly, which is something that's pretty cool, is you could actually put this encoder on an entirely another computer, so you could have that computer be your rendering engine, and you can keep on working on your main machine. And while this is running, you can close this. And that'll speed up the rendering time a little bit because it's not going to be trying to run both programs at once. Alright, and the render on this one was about 7 minutes and 59 seconds, and if you compare that to Sony Vegas's 8 minutes and 36 seconds, then Adobe Premiere beats it by 37 seconds. So let's take a look at the video. Alright. And immediately I can see a line right here and here and here, and that is brought on by the percentage based shrinking. Now I could actually make that a little bit better by making the scale a little bit larger, but then we're going to have overlapping here and here, overlapping there. That little itty bitty difference, I'm probably going to be the only person that would actually see that unless somebody else looks at it and really looks for it. But for me, for a perfectionist, this isn't good enough. So if I saw this and I decided this was going to be my final product, I would have to redo it again, and I would have to up the scale from 33.3 to about 34. That would take care of this. It would do some overlapping there, and I would just have to be unhappy about that. Okay, so here comes the question of which one is better, Adobe Premiere Pro or Sony Vegas. It's going to be a little bit different because if you're making videos just for yourself, so you're going to be the only one touching the video and then you upload it to YouTube or do whatever you do with it afterwards, then in my opinion, the best video editing software suite is Photoshop, Adobe After Effects, and Sony Vegas. And the only reason for that is because I feel that Sony Vegas has higher usability. However, I was looking through the paper and I found a job for a video editor, and that job said minimum 2 years experience with Adobe After Effects. And if you're using Adobe After Effects, you can immediately assume that they're also going to say Adobe Premiere Pro as well. So what that means is that if you're looking for a paying job, if you're looking to go into another company, you're going to use their machines with them looking over you and telling you what to do, chances are you're going to be using Adobe Premiere. Now, I personally don't ever believe that I'm going to be looking for a job as a video editor, but if I go somewhere else and they say that they want me to edit a video, I want to be able to sit down at that machine and edit that video. And it's because of that that I'm learning Adobe Premiere Pro, and it's because of that that this video that you're watching was made with Adobe Premiere Pro.